One morning in the freezing kitchen, I accidentally saw my son-in-law's phone light up on the shelf. A message appeared. The sender was my wife's name, the woman who had been dead for more than a year. Tonight, the old cabin. I've been counting the hours to see you. My hand froze. My breath stopped. But when I opened the phone, I realized the message wasn't the real horror. The real horror was how far back the secret went, and how close it had been living to me. I'm deeply grateful you're here with me today. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from, your city, your country. I'd love to know who's in this room with me. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for reflection and education. Any similarity to actual names or places is coincidental, but everything it teaches you is real. The coffee maker finished its cycle at exactly 6:29, the same as every morning. After 47 years of the same kitchen, the same countertop, the same pale winter light through the window above the sink, a man stops needing to check the time for certain things. I reached for 2 mugs. I always reached for 2 mugs. Even now, even after a full year. I set them side by side, the blue one with the chipped handle that Eleanor refused to throw away, and the plain white one that had always been mine. I poured coffee into mine first, then hers. The steam curled up slow in the cold air. 800 acres of Texas hill country, and at 6:30 every single one of them was perfectly silent. I pulled out her chair and sat in mine. "Cold front coming in today," I said. Nobody answered. I looked out at the pasture. The grass was frostbitten, the oak trees standing dark against a sky that hadn't decided yet what color it wanted to be. Somewhere past the barn, one of the horses shifted in the early dark. 47 years of mornings in this kitchen. We used to fight about small things: who left the back door unlatched, whether the radio was too loud, whether the coffee was strong enough. I used to think those arguments were an inconvenience. Now I understood they were the point. The entire point. Eleanor's mug sat across from me, full and steaming, getting colder by the minute. I didn't move it. On the shelf beside the doorway, cookbooks she never opened, the ceramic rooster her sister gave us in 1991, Diane's medical school photo, sat something that hadn't been there yesterday. A cell phone. Black case face down on the wood. Grant had stopped by the evening before, pleasant as always. A handshake, small talk about cattle prices, a promise to bring Diane out the following weekend. He must have left it when he reached for his coat. My phone buzzed. A text from Dennis Prath sent at 6:18. "Thinking of you this morning, Bob. You holding up all right. 20 years I'd known that man. Loyalty like that didn't announce itself." I set the phone down without answering. Behind me, Grant's phone lit up. A notification. A message arriving. I turned around slowly. The screen glowed in the gray morning light, bright and clear against the cold. I read the preview text from across the room. I set down my mug, and I walked toward the shelf. I picked up the phone with 2 fingers. The screen was still glowing. A text message, notification sender name displayed in clean white letters at the top. Eleanor Calloway. I stopped breathing, not figuratively. My lungs simply forgot what they were supposed to do, the same way they had on the morning the hospice nurse walked out of our bedroom and looked at me with that particular silence that needed no words. The name on the screen was my wife's name. My wife, buried on the east ridge of this property for exactly 1 year, 3 weeks, and 4 days. Below her name, "Tonight, same cabin." I've been counting the hours. The screen dimmed, went dark. I stood in my kitchen holding my son-in-law's phone and did not move. Outside, the January wind moved through the live oaks. I had been hearing that sound for nearly 5 decades. Right now, I heard nothing. My first thought, and I am not proud of this, was that I had misread it. That my mind, still soft from sleep and weighted with 12 months of grief, had filled in the wrong letters. I pressed the side button. The screen lit up again. Eleanor Calloway. Tonight, same cabin. I've been counting the hours. Her name. Her photograph beside it, the small circular profile image next to every contact. I brought the screen closer. It was Eleanor, not a recent photo. She looked mid-60s, her hair still that silver-brown shade she'd had before the illness took everything. She was smiling with the slightly self-conscious expression she always wore when someone pointed a camera at her. I know you're taking this, but I won't be the one to ask you to stop. I had never seen this photograph in my life. She was standing somewhere outdoors. Dense cedar trees behind her. Somewhere in the hill country, somewhere she had been without me, and someone had taken her picture, and she had smiled for them. My hands began to shake. A fine tremor in the fingers, the kind a man my age had learned to notice. The message had been sent at 6:17 this morning, 13 minutes ago, while I was standing at this counter pouring coffee into her cup. Someone had sent a message to my son-in-law using my dead wife's name and my dead wife's photograph, stored in his phone under her contact. Or, the other possibility sat at the back of my mind, like a stone dropped in still water. I wasn't ready to look at it directly. I set the phone down, face down, then I picked it up again. Don't open it. The thought was clear, the kind that came from 28 years of making decisions with real consequences. Once you know you carry it. My thumb was already on the screen. The passcode screen appeared, 6 digits. I stared at it for a moment, then typed without thinking 092011. Tyler's birthday. September 20th, 2011. I had been there in that hospital waiting room when Diane called me, her voice breaking in the best possible way. The phone unlocked. I sat down in Eleanor's chair. The message thread was already open. The notification had pulled it up automatically. The contact name at the top read Eleanor Calloway with that photograph I didn't recognize. I scrolled up slowly. The way you approach something you already know is going to hurt you. The most recent message sent this morning at 6:17 tonight, same cabin. I've been counting the hours. Grant had not replied yet. I scrolled up further. Last week, 4 messages back and forth. Arrangements. A time, a place, language that was familiar in the way that only comes from long habit between two people. I kept scrolling. Last month. 3 months ago. 6 months ago, 2 weeks after Eleanor's funeral, when I had been sitting in this same kitchen, barely able to remember to eat. I keep thinking about Sunday Grant had written 4 days after we buried her. Me too, the reply came. Same time. My jaw tightened. I kept scrolling. 1 year back. 2 years. The messages changed in tone the further I went. More careful at first, shorter, the kind of language people use when they're still deciding how much to say. By mid-2021, the caution was gone entirely. By 2022, the messages had the easy shorthand of 2 people who had stopped pretending to be anything other than what they were. Every Wednesday. That detail surfaced again and again, references to Wednesday afternoons, a cabin, a particular stretch of road off Route 12. I stopped scrolling and sat very still. Eleanor had walked every Wednesday afternoon for 3 years. She told me the movement helped with the fatigue from her medications. I had never questioned it. I had offered to come with her twice, and she had said she preferred the quiet, and I had respected that, because I had always respected the things she needed that I couldn't give her. The thread went back to March of 2020. 6 years. 6 years of Wednesday afternoons. I set the phone face down on the table and looked at the far wall of the kitchen, the wall where Eleanor had hung a wooden cross the year we moved in, flanked by 2 photographs, our wedding and the ranch in its first summer. I had looked at that wall 10,000 times. Right now I was looking at it and understanding that I had not known my wife the way I believed I had. Or perhaps I had known her completely, and something had happened inside that knowledge that I had been too certain, too settled, too sure of myself to see. The thread started March of 2020. That was 6 years ago. That was also the year Grant Mercer became my son-in-law. I sat in that chair for 40 minutes. I didn't read any further into the thread. I had read enough. I backed out of the messages, powered the screen off, and set the phone exactly where I had found it, face down on the shelf, beside the kitchen doorway, angled the same way, same distance from the edge. 28 years in the Army teaches you to put things back precisely where you found them. Then I went to the sink, rinsed both coffee mugs, and waited. Grant's truck came up the gravel drive at 7:58. I heard the engine before I saw the headlights sweeping across the kitchen wall. That particular sound of a late-model pickup moving too fast for a frost-covered road, the way a man drives when he's confident the road belongs to him. I dried my hands on the dish towel and walked to the front door. He was already on the porch steps when I opened it. 42 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled a doorway without trying. He was smiling that easy, practiced smile that I had watched work on every person in every room he had ever entered. Lawyers, generals, hospital administrators. It was a very good smile. Bob. He spread his hands apologetically. I am so sorry to bother you this early. I think I left my phone here last night. His hand went once to his jacket pocket, then stopped. Too quick for most people to notice, but not for me. This was not the phone a careless man forgot. This was the phone a careful man suddenly needed back. I looked at him. Not the way I had looked at him for 12 years, the comfortable, incurious look of a man who has already decided what he thinks of someone and stopped checking. I looked at him the way I used to look at junior officers during debriefs, watching the space between what a man said and what his face did while he said it. His smile reached his mouth. It did not reach his eyes. In 12 years, I had never noticed that. I don't think so, I said. I haven't seen any phone, but I'll keep an eye out. Something moved behind his expression, too fast, too small, gone before I could name it. Then the smile again, steady and unbothered. Probably left it in the truck, honestly. He laughed once, short and easy. 72 degrees in the cab, my brain stops working. You doing all right out here? Cold front's supposed to hit by noon. I'm fine, I said. Drive safe on the way out. Road's icy past the cattle guard. He nodded, said something warm and forgettable, and walked back to his truck. I stood in the doorway and watched him go. Watched the way he moved, no hesitation, no urgency, the walk of a man who had decided everything was under control. The truck reached the main road and turned south toward San Antonio. I went back inside, picked up Grant's phone from the shelf, slid it into the front pocket of my shirt against my chest. Then I picked up my own phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 3 weeks. Walter Briggs. I pressed call. Walt picked up on the second ring. Bob. His voice was the same as always, unhurried, slightly rough at the edges. The voice of a man who had spent 30 years in rooms where saying the wrong thing had real consequences. You're calling early. I need you to come out to the ranch. A pause, not a long one. Walt Briggs did not waste time on long pauses. Today, this morning if you can. Another pause, shorter this time. Give me 2 hours. That was it. No, what's wrong? No, is everything all right? No, can't it wait until Sunday? In 30 years of friendship, Walt had never once asked me to justify a request like that. It was one of the things I valued most about him, and had never told him directly, the way men of our generation tended not to. One more thing, I said. What's my son-in-law's full name? I heard the quality of the silence change. It was a small thing. A fraction of a second, the way a room shifts when someone opens a window you didn't know was closed. Walt knew Grant Mercer. They had met a dozen times over 12 years, barbecues, holidays, the occasional Sunday, when Grant drove Diane out to the ranch, and the 4 of us sat on the porch and talked about nothing consequential. Walt knew exactly who Grant was, but he asked anyway, Grant Mercer. Not why are you asking? Not what does Grant have to do with this? Just the name repeated back to me in a tone that was half a degree too careful to be casual. That's right, I said. I'll be there by 10:30. He ended the call. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, turning that pause over in my mind, the way you turn a stone to see what's underneath it. Then I filed it away. Walt would explain when he was ready. Walt always explained when he was ready, not before, and pushing him produced nothing except a polite and absolute silence. I went to my office. The room still smelled like the same combination of old paper gun oil and the particular cedar of the bookshelves Eleanor had commissioned from a craftsman in Fredericksburg in 1998. Maps on one wall framed and yellowed at the edges. Photographs along the other units, campaigns, handshakes with men whose names most people knew from history books. A life's worth of careful work contained in one room. I sat down at my desk, took Grant's phone from my shirt pocket, and laid it flat on the blotter in front of me. Then I picked it up and opened the message thread again. March of 2020, the very beginning. I started reading. The first message Grant sent Eleanor was on a Tuesday evening in March of 2020. Dinner was wonderful. Thank you for having us. Polite. Formal. The kind of thing a son-in-law sent his mother-in-law after a family meal. Eleanor's reply came the next morning. It was good to have you both. Diane looked happy. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would have made me look twice. I kept reading. April. May. The messages grew slightly warmer, a shared observation about a news story, a question about a recipe. Eleanor had made a brief exchange about Tyler's school performance. Still nothing I could point to. Still the language of two people finding the edges of each other's company. Then June, I keep thinking about what you said on the porch last Sunday, about feeling invisible. I stopped. I read that line 3 times. Eleanor had told Grant she felt invisible. She had sat on my porch, our porch, the one I built with my own hands the summer after we moved in, and told my son-in-law something she had never once said to me. I searched my memory for that Sunday. I remembered nothing unusual. I had probably been inside, reading or watching the news or doing any of the 100 ordinary things a man did on a Sunday afternoon when he believed his life was settled and his marriage was solid and he had earned the right to be unremarkable. I kept reading. By late 2020, the messages had changed entirely. Longer. More careful. The language of two people who had decided jointly and without ceremony to stop pretending the conversation was about anything other than what it was. I will not repeat what they wrote. It is not the kind of thing a man can unread, and I had already read it once. Wednesday afternoons. The cabin appeared for the first time in February of 2021, a specific address off Route 12 tucked into a cedar draw I knew by sight. I had driven past that turnoff 100 times. Eleanor had walked that road on Wednesday afternoons for 3 years, and I had waved her off from the porch with a coffee mug in my hand, glad she was getting exercise. Glad the movement seemed to help her energy, glad to see her come home with color in her cheeks. I set the phone down on the desk. I sat very still and let myself feel it, the full weight of what I was reading, for exactly 60 seconds. That was a habit from the Army. You allowed yourself the feeling. You did not pretend it wasn't there. Then you put it somewhere it couldn't interfere with what needed to happen next. 60 seconds. Then I picked the phone back up. I scrolled to September of 2023. And I found the message that changed everything I thought I understood about the last 6 years. The message was sent on a Friday afternoon. Grant had written, "Bob is losing it. I heard it from Diane. He forgets things, gets confused. You deserve so much more than spending your best years taking care of a man who won't even notice." I read it twice, then a third time. Then I looked at Eleanor's reply. Nothing. For 3 days, nothing at all. I could see the timestamp on Grant's message Friday at 2:47 p.m., and the next message in the thread was from Eleanor Monday morning at 9:12. I need time. That was all. 2 words. Grant replied within minutes. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. The ease of that response, the patience of a man who knew he could afford to wait, turned my stomach in a way the earlier messages hadn't. Then 2 more weeks of silence from Eleanor's side. I scrolled through them slowly. Grant sent 4 messages in those 14 days. Careful ones, not pushy. The messages of a man who understood that pressing too hard would cost him everything, so he pressed just enough to maintain the thread. Eleanor's reply came on a Sunday evening in early October. Don't talk about him anymore. 5 words. I read them and felt something shift in my chest, not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that needed to be true, even if I couldn't yet confirm it was. She had told him not to talk about me. I sat with that for the long moment. Grant had spent months planting a specific idea in Eleanor's mind, that I was declining, that I was losing my grip on the present, that she was already halfway alone without knowing it. It was a careful, patient kind of cruelty, the kind that didn't leave marks. But Eleanor had pushed back, not loudly, not with the kind of declaration I might have made in her position. Quietly, the way she did everything that mattered, 5 words on a Sunday evening that closed a door Grant had been trying to hold open. I set the phone down and pulled open the center drawer of my desk. It was still there, the small square of notepaper I had found 3 weeks ago, tucked beneath Eleanor's reading glasses in the kitchen junk drawer. I had assumed it was a forgotten grocery list, or a phone number she had meant to transfer somewhere. 8 digits, no spaces, no label. Her handwriting precise and slightly left-leaning, the way it had always been. I had no idea what it meant. I was still looking at it when 3 sharp knocks landed on the front door. Walt, an hour earlier than he had said. I folded the notepaper, put it in my shirt pocket next to Grant's phone, and went to let him in. Walt Briggs looked exactly like what he was, a 72-year-old man who had spent 30 years making decisions that never appeared in any official record. Medium height, white hair, cut short, the kind of unhurried stillness that most people mistook for slowness until it was too late to correct that mistake. He was carrying a thermos of coffee and a laptop bag, which told me he had packed before I called him. "You got here fast," I said. "I was already in Bourne." He stepped inside without waiting to be invited. He never waited to be invited, and set his things on the kitchen table. "Tell me," I told him. "All of it." The phone on the shelf, the passcode, the 6 years of messages, the cabin off Route 12. Grant's visit at 8 o'clock. The notepaper with the 8-digit number. I spoke for 9 minutes without stopping, the way I had learned to brief chronological, no editorializing facts in the order they occurred. Walt listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the phone on the table between us. "The number on the paper," he said. "May I?" I handed it to him. He looked at it for 3 seconds, then set it aside without comment. Walt only set things aside without comment when he needed time to decide how much to say about them. "I need to check something," he said. He opened his laptop, connected to a mobile hotspot he pulled from his jacket pocket, not his phone, a separate device, and began typing. "Grant Mercer. What's his connection to Dennis Prath?" They know each other from when Grant was still in uniform. Prath introduced him to Diane at a function in 2011. I watched Walt's hands on the keyboard. "Why?" "Because Prath has been sloppy." He turned the laptop to face me. A cloud storage account. Folders organized by date, by name, by what appeared to be project codes. Walt opened one folder and I leaned forward. Photographs of financial documents. Wire transfer confirmations. A scanned copy of a passport. I recognized the format immediately. The eagle watermark, the particular blue of the cover. The name read Gregory Walsh. The photograph inside was my son-in-law's face. Below that, a detailed aerial diagram of this property. Every building marked. The water well, the generator shed, the root cellar Eleanor had used for canning. Entry points circled in red. "How do you have access to Prath's account?" I asked. Walt looked at me steadily. "That's a long story." "How long?" "Long enough that I'll tell you when this is finished." He pointed at the screen. "Right now, look at the transfer schedule." I looked. A single date highlighted in the last column. February 17th, 2026. 39 days from today. $25 million. I sat back in my chair. He was never planning to stay, I said. No, Walt said. He was never planning to stay. We had been sitting in silence for perhaps 10 minutes, Walt with his coffee, me with nothing, both of us looking at the laptop screen when my phone rang. Diane. I looked at Walt. He gave me a single small nod that meant exactly what I needed it to mean. Answer it, say nothing, hold the line. Hey, sweetheart, I said. Hi, Dad. She used the Vietnamese word for father the way she always had a habit picked up from a college roommate 20 years ago that had never left her. Her voice sounded tired, not the tired of a long shift at the hospital, which I knew well. Something else underneath it. Just checking in. How are you doing out there? Fine, I said. Cold front came in around noon like they said. How are you? I'm good. Too fast. Diane had never been a natural liar. She was too direct for it, too much her mother's daughter in that particular way. Grant mentioned he left his phone at your place last night. He did, I said. I called him this morning when I found it. He came by and picked it up around 8. Walt was watching me from across the table. His expression did not change. Oh, good, Diane said. Good, okay, that's good. You sound tired, I said. Long week? Always. A pause. Beau, are you? Is everything okay out there? You've seemed a little off lately. I don't mean anything by it, I'm fine, Diane. I kept my voice even and warm, the voice I had used with junior officers who needed reassurance without condescension. I've been sleeping well, eating well. Walt's actually here right now, we're playing chess. Walt raised one eyebrow, approximately 2 millimeters. I ignored him. Okay, Diane said. She didn't sound entirely convinced, but she didn't push. That was also her mother's quality, knowing when a door was closed and choosing not to force it. I'll try to come out next weekend. I'd like that, I said. Drive safe. You too, Dad. Love you. Love you too. I ended the call and set the phone on the table. Walt looked at it, then at me. She knows more than she's saying, he said. I know. Grant has something on her, or over her. He said it the way he said most things, not as speculation, but as a conclusion he had already reached and was now sharing as a courtesy. She's not calling to check on you. She's calling to check on the situation. I looked at the calendar on the wall above my desk. January 9th. The transfer date was February 17th. How many days do we have? I asked. Walt followed my eyes to the calendar. He counted once, quietly. 39, he said. 39 days before Grant disappears and the money follows him. Walt left at 2:30 without explaining where he was going. He never did. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, then walked to the master bedroom. I had been stopping at that door for weeks, hand on the frame weight on my back foot. The hesitation of a man who knew that whatever was waiting on the other side would still be waiting regardless. Today, I crossed it. Eleanor's side of the room was exactly as she had left it. Nightstand water glass, an unfinished novel with a bookmark at page 212. I opened the drawer. Nothing useful. I went to the closet. At the back half, hidden behind a folded blanket on the top shelf, was the cedar box. I had given it to her in the spring of 1985, our 10th anniversary, her initials inlaid in the lid. She had cried when she opened it. One of my finer moments. I carried it to the bed and lifted out the velvet tray. Earrings, a bracelet. Her mother's pearl necklace. I set the tray aside and ran my fingers along the bottom lining. In the far corner, fixed flat against the velvet with a strip of black electrical tape, was a USB drive. I held it in my palm without moving. She had put it there deliberately. Eleanor never did anything without a reason, and she never hid anything without intending for it to be found by the right person at the right time. I turned it over once between my fingers. Eleanor, I said quietly. First time I had said her name out loud all day. My phone rang. Dennis Prath, I answered. Dennis, Bob just checking in again. Warm, easy, the voice of a concerned friend. I heard Grant was out your way this morning. Everything all right? I went very still. Everything's fine. He thought he'd left something here. Turned out he hadn't. Good, good. You take care of yourself. Always. Thanks for calling, Dennis. I ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed. Grant had told Prath he was coming to my ranch this morning. Before 8 a.m. Before he had knocked on my door. I thought back to every phone call Prath had made since Eleanor passed, the regularity of them, the particular questions he always managed to work in. How are things at the ranch? Has Diane been out recently? Is Grant helping you manage the property? I had taken every one of those calls as loyalty. I stood up, walked to my office, and sat down at my desk. I looked at the USB in my hand for a long moment. Then I plugged it into my laptop. The drive mounted immediately. One folder. Inside it, a single file labeled, "Bob read this first." I opened it. Walt came back at 3:15. He let himself in the way he always did, 2 knocks, then the door, and found me at my desk with the laptop open and both hands flat on the surface beside it. He looked at my face and pulled up a chair without being asked. "What is it?" he said. "She kept a journal." I turned the laptop to face him. 18 months, starting July 1st, 2023. Walt leaned forward and read the first entry in silence. I had already read it 3 times. July 1st, 2023. I have begun to understand that something is wrong. Not with Bob, with the situation around Bob. I am going to write down what I observe because I am 67 years old, and I know that memory is not reliable when a person is frightened, and I am frightened. Walt sat back. She started a written record. "From the beginning," I said. "Read the next one." He scrolled slowly. I watched his face instead of the screen. I had already seen what was there. Eleanor had written with the same precision she brought to everything: dates, times, specific observations. The questions Grant had been asking about the property. The conversations he initiated about estate planning when I was away from the house. The afternoon he had sat with her on the porch and mentioned almost as an aside that Diane was worried about my memory. He said it gently, Eleanor had written. That is what I noticed most. The gentleness. A man who wanted me to believe something would say it gently. She didn't trust him, Walt said. She stopped trusting him in July of 2023. But she didn't leave him. She stayed close and she watched. I stood up and walked to the window. 18 months, Walt. She spent the last 18 months of her life building a case. Why didn't she tell you? I had been asking myself that question for the past 40 minutes. Keep reading. Entry September 3rd. Walt scrolled forward. I heard the quality of his silence change as he read it, the particular stillness of a man absorbing something that reordered his understanding of a situation. Bob, he said. I know. She thought, I know what she thought. I turned around. She thought if I knew, I would act immediately. And if I acted immediately, Grant would disappear before we had enough to stop him permanently. So she waited. She collected. She built something solid enough that when it was used, it would hold. Walt looked at me across the room. She was protecting you. She was protecting all of us. I sat back down. The way she always protected everyone quietly, without telling anyone she was doing it at considerable cost to herself. Walt closed the laptop gently. There's more on the drive, I said. She mentions a name at the end of the September 3rd entry. Someone she trusted with something important. Walt looked up. Who? I opened the laptop again. Howard Slade. The September 3rd entry was longer than the others. Eleanor had written it in the early morning before I was awake. She noted the time at the top, 5:47 a.m., the way she noted everything. I could picture her at the small desk in the corner of our bedroom, the one she used for correspondence writing by lamplight, while I slept 12 feet away and understood nothing. He has been telling me that Bob is declining, she wrote. That Bob forgets things, gets confused in conversations, loses the thread. He says Diane is worried but doesn't want to upset me. He says it gently, always gently, the way you'd tell someone their house was on fire if you wanted them to stay calm long enough to lock the doors behind them. I watched Bob carefully for 3 weeks after Grant first said it. Bob is not declining. Bob is exactly who he has always been, sharper than he lets on, slower to speak than to understand, the kind of man who listens to everything and responds to only what matters. Grant is lying. The question is why. Walt read that paragraph twice. I watched him do it. He needed her isolated, Walt said. If she believed you were losing your mind, she'd stop trusting your judgment, stop consulting you, start making decisions, financial decisions, without you. Keep reading, I said. Walt scrolled down. Eleanor had continued. October 2022. Grant suggested upgrading the ranch network. New router, new system, faster connection for the whole property. Bob thought it was a kind gesture. I thought it was a kind gesture. Grant spent an afternoon in the equipment room with a technician he brought himself. Walt stopped reading. He looked at me. The router, I said. He controlled the network. Walt's voice was flat. Every device in this house ran through equipment he installed. He could see traffic, block messages, redirect calls. I stood up. I was thinking about the autumn of 2022. Eleanor had seemed distant that October, quieter than usual, slower to respond when I spoke to her. I had assumed it was the fatigue that came and went with her health. I had been patient and given her space the way a considerate husband did, and she had probably been sitting in the same room wondering why I had stopped trying to reach her. He had put a wall between us and handed us each a reason to believe the other had built it. There are 3 messages from that period I sent Eleanor that she never replied to, I said. I remember because it was unusual. I assumed she hadn't seen them. She didn't, Walt said. She never saw them. I walked to the window. Outside, the sun was going down behind the ridge, the sky turning the particular burnt orange that Texas did better than anywhere else on Earth. Eleanor had loved that color. She had made me stop the truck once years ago just to look at it. Grant had taken that from us, too. Every quiet evening we had sat together and not quite connected. Every silence I had mistaken for peace. Walt said, Bob, just my name. One word. But I had known this man for 30 years, and I had never once heard that particular note in his voice. I turned around. There's something else on the drive, he said. You need to sit down. I sat down. Walt turned the laptop back toward himself, navigated to the bottom of the USB drive, and opened the last folder. Inside was a single audio file. The timestamp showed November 15th, 2024. 2 months before Eleanor died. She recorded it here, I asked, in this house. Walt looked at me steadily. Which means she knew about the listening devices by then. She found another way around them. He pointed at the file name HS-visit-November 15th. H.S. Howard Slade. He came to the house. I remembered that visit. Howard had called ahead, said he wanted to review some paperwork related to Eleanor's original estate documents. Routine stuff, the kind of administrative follow-up that happened when a person's health was declining. I had been in San Antonio that afternoon for a doctor's appointment of my own. Eleanor had been alone with Howard for 2 hours. I had not thought about it once since then. Walt pressed play. The recording began with silence, then the soft sound of paper moving, chairs adjusting. Then Eleanor's voice. I had not heard her voice in 1 year, 3 weeks, and 4 days. She sounded weaker than I remembered from that autumn. The illness had been taking ground by then, steadily and without negotiation. But her tone was composed, precise. The voice of a woman who had decided exactly what she needed to say and had no intention of wasting a single word of the time she had left to say it. Howard, I need you to understand that this house is being monitored. I cannot speak freely here under normal circumstances. What I'm about to tell you needs to be recorded and kept somewhere safe because I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do this. Howard's voice quieter. I understand, Eleanor. Take your time. Grant Mercer has been systematically positioning himself to take control of this family's assets following my death. I have documented 18 months of observation in a file on a USB drive hidden in the cedar jewelry box Robert gave me in 1985. The drive also contains financial records I was able to photograph without Grant's knowledge. A pause. The sound of her breathing, slow and deliberate. I need you to hold a second drive. Sealed. You will give it to Robert only if two conditions are met. I die before my 72nd birthday, and Robert comes to you directly. If Bob doesn't find his way to you on his own, don't give it to him. He'll need to have already understood enough to look. The recording continued for another 4 minutes. Names, account numbers, the address of the cabin off Route 12. Eleanor's voice stayed level throughout. Only at the very end did something shift in it, something small and human breaking through the precision. Tell him I'm sorry I couldn't say this to his face. He'll understand why I couldn't. The file ended. Walt closed the laptop quietly. I did not speak for 2 full minutes. Walt did not fill the silence, which was the right thing to do, and one of the reasons I had trusted this man for 30 years. Then I picked up my phone and called Howard Slade. He answered before the first ring finished. "Howard," I said, "it's Bob Calloway." "I know." His voice was steady, but not entirely calm, the voice of a man who had been waiting for a specific phone call for a long time and was now managing the relief of receiving it. "I've been hoping you'd call Bob. I wasn't sure if you would." Eleanor left me a recording, a long exhale. "Then you found the drive. Good. That's good." A pause. "Are you all right?" "I'm functional," I said. "Tell me what you're holding." Howard Slade was 68 years old, a sole practitioner out of Kerrville, who had handled Calloway family legal matters for 22 years before Grant had quietly maneuvered Patricia Holt into the picture 3 years ago. I had accepted the transition without question. At the time, Patricia was younger, more current on certain financial instruments, and Grant had presented the suggestion as a practical upgrade. I had not asked Howard how he felt about it. "I have a sealed USB drive," Howard said. "Eleanor gave it to me in person, November 15th of last year, during what Grant believed was a routine document review visit. She wrote the conditions on a separate card and sealed that too. I was not to open either one." "What were the conditions?" "That she die before her 72nd birthday, which she did by 4 years, and that you contact me directly without being told to do so by anyone else." He paused. "No one told you to call me, did they?" "No one told me anything," I said. "I found her recording on my own." "Then the condition is met." His voice shifted, something loosening in it, the way a man sounded when he had been holding a weight for a long time and had finally been given permission to set it down. "I can be at the ranch tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock, if that works." "9 o'clock," I said. "Bob." He hesitated. "I want you to know when Grant suggested transitioning your account to Patricia Holt, I didn't understand why. I had suspicions, but nothing I could act on. I've spent 3 years wondering if I should have pushed harder." "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." I ended the call and looked at Walt across the room. He had been standing by the window, giving me the space of the conversation without leaving it entirely. "Howard's coming tomorrow," I said. 9 a.m. Walt nodded. Then he said, "Prath called me tonight. I went still. While I was in the car, an hour ago." Walt moved away from the window and sat down. He wanted to know what I was doing today. I told him I'd been in Bourne running errands. "Did he believe you?" "Prath believes what he wants to believe." Walt looked at me carefully. "But he's asking questions he has no reason to ask unless someone has told him to ask them. Bob, I need you to understand something. Dennis Prath didn't call you twice today out of loyalty." I looked at the wall. 20 years of mentorship. 20 years of what I had taken for genuine regard. "I know," I said. "Tell me about Prath," I said. "Everything." Walt pulled his chair closer to the desk. When Walt Briggs decided to tell you something, he told it in order without decoration, and you did not interrupt him. I had learned that in 1994 and never forgotten it. Dennis Prath came up under you in '98, Walt began. You sponsored his promotion to lieutenant colonel in 2003, put your name on his file twice after that. He retired 3 years ago with a clean record and a pension. He paused. On paper. And off paper, Prath has been living above his means for approximately 4 years. Property in Colorado, a boat he keeps in Corpus Christi, travel that doesn't match a colonel's retirement income. Walt looked at me steadily. I noticed it 18 months ago. I didn't say anything because I wasn't certain, and I don't make accusations without being certain. When did you connect him to Grant? 6 months ago. There's a financial trail between a shell company Prath controls and one of Grant's LLCs, Thin, but it's there. Grant needed someone with active defense contractor relationships. Prath had them. Prath needed money. Grant had it. Walt folded his hands on the table. Your ranch was the connection point. A retired brigadier general's property, no one looks twice at who comes and goes. I thought about the last 3 years. The visits Prath had made always with reasonable explanations. The times he had stayed for dinner and asked the kind of questions that seemed like friendly curiosity. The afternoon he had walked the perimeter of the property, with me admiring the land, pointing out the ridgelines. Mapping it. He introduced Grant to Diane, I said, at a defense contractor's function in San Antonio, 2011. Walt's voice was careful. Bob, I don't know if that introduction was deliberate from the beginning, or if it became useful later. I want to be honest with you about what I know and what I'm inferring. What do you know for certain? That Prath is in contact with Grant regularly, that he's been reporting on your movements and activities, that he knew Grant was coming here this morning before Grant arrived. Walt met my eyes. That's not a coincidence. That's a surveillance operation. The word landed in the room and stayed there. I stood up and walked to the window. 800 acres of land my family had owned for 40 years, and somewhere in the walls of this house, devices were recording every word I spoke. We back up everything tonight, I said. The USB, the phone, all of it. Separate drive not connected to this network. Agreed. Walt stood. And Bob, inside this house from now on, we talk about nothing that matters. Weather, chess, cattle prices. Understood. I looked at him. Everything else happens outside. Walt nodded and reached for his laptop. I looked around the kitchen, the walls, the ceiling, the baseboards. 7 devices according to Eleanor's number. 7 sets of ears that had been listening since last summer, catching every lonely word I had spoken to myself in the dark. I had not known, but Eleanor had. She had written it down and hidden it in the bottom of a cedar box, and she had trusted me to find it. I went to get an external hard drive from the cabinet. Walt and I finished the backup at 11:30. He stayed the night in the guest room without being asked which was the right call, and we both knew it. I was up before 5. By 7:30, we were in Walt's car heading south on US 281 toward San Antonio, talking about nothing. The weather, the price of winter hay, whether the cold front would hold through the weekend. Inside the car, outside the ranch network, we could speak freely. We used the 40-minute drive to finalize what I needed from Patricia Holt and what I was not going to tell her yet. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building on East Commerce Street, clean, modern, the kind of space that said competent and expensive without saying anything else. Patricia Holt was 55, precise in the way that good lawyers were precise with the carefully neutral expression of someone who had spent 2 decades making sure her face never gave away more than her words intended. She stood when I came in. Bob, this is a surprise. I didn't have you on the calendar. I was in the area, I said. I hope you have a few minutes. She did. She always had a few minutes for Robert Calloway. I sat across from her and spent the first 10 minutes on routine matters. Questions about the property trust. A question about the terms of Eleanor's will, the kind of conversation that justified the visit without revealing its purpose. Patricia answered everything smoothly, professionally, without a single unnecessary word. Then I mentioned the LLC. I was looking through some of Eleanor's financial papers last night, I said, keeping my voice entirely casual. I came across a reference to a Delaware limited liability company, Mercer Holdings. I don't recall seeing that in any of the estate documents. Can you walk me through it? 1 second. 2. Patricia's expression did not change, but something behind it did, a stillness that was different from her professional stillness. The stillness of a person deciding very quickly how much ground to give up. I'd need to pull the relevant documents to give you accurate detail, she said. I wouldn't want to speak to something without having the paperwork in front of me. Of course, I said. What about the financial power of attorney Diane signed 18 months ago? I'd like to review the scope of that authorization. This time the pause was longer. Her eyes moved just slightly, just for a moment, to the filing cabinet along the left wall. Then back to me. I can have my assistant compile that for you by end of week, she said. That would be fine. I stood and offered my hand. Thank you for your time, Patricia. She shook it. Her hand was steady. Her eyes were not. Walt was waiting in the car at the curb. I got in and closed the door. She's compromised, I said. How bad? Bad enough that she couldn't answer 2 straightforward questions about her own client's estate. I looked straight ahead as Walt pulled into traffic. Grant has something on her. Something she can't afford to have surfaced. Walt was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? Find out what it is, I said, before she decides that protecting it is more important than anything else. Howard Slade pulled up to the ranch at 2:15, 45 minutes later than we had agreed, and apologized for it, with the particular sincerity of a man who understood that punctuality was a form of respect and had failed to deliver it. He was 68, slightly built, with white hair, and the careful movements of someone who had learned not to hurry in a profession where hurrying produced mistakes. Walt shook his hand at the door. They had met once before, years ago, at a function I had hosted. They regarded each other with the measured courtesy of 2 people who understood that they were both here for the same reason, but had arrived from very different directions. We sat in the kitchen. I had made coffee. Outside, the January light was thin and flat, the kind that gave everything sharp edges and no warmth. I put the notepaper on the table between us, the small square with Eleanor's 8-digit number, the one I had found in my desk drawer 3 weeks ago and carried in my shirt pocket ever since. Howard looked at it for perhaps 4 seconds. Then he said, "Where did you find this?" "Eleanor's desk drawer, under her reading glasses." I assumed it was a phone number she hadn't transferred somewhere. Howard picked up the paper carefully by the edge, the way you handled something that might matter later. He turned it over, looked at the back, then set it down. "This is a device identifier," he said. "Military standard format, 8 digits, no prefix, no dash. It's used to catalog surveillance hardware." He looked up at me. Eleanor recognized it. She couldn't write down what it meant. She knew the house was being monitored, so she copied the number and hid it where she thought you might eventually look. The kitchen was very quiet. "She found a device," I said. "At minimum 1, possibly more. She couldn't remove it or disable it without alerting whoever was monitoring, so she documented it the only way she safely could." Howard looked at the paper again. "She was telling you the house was compromised, in the only language she could use without being understood by the wrong people." Walt leaned back in his chair. "She identified a surveillance device, copied its ID number, and hid the evidence in a location only her husband would look." He said it slowly, the way you said something you needed to hear out loud to fully believe, without any formal training. "Eleanor was a precise woman," I said. I looked at the notepaper. The handwriting was so familiar, it was like a physical pressure in the center of my chest, that slightly left-leaning script, the number 7s with the small crossbar she had always made. "Bob." Walt's voice was quiet. He was looking at his laptop screen. If this is an active device, ID and the hardware is still in place. It's still listening, I said. Right now. I looked at the ceiling, the walls, the baseboards I had never thought to question. Everything we've said in this house, I said. Walt nodded once. Howard looked between us. How many devices are we talking about? We don't know yet, Walt said. He closed the laptop. But we're going to find out tonight. Howard left at 5 o'clock with a handshake and a promise to return the following morning with the sealed USB drive. Walt walked him to his car while I remained in the kitchen, standing at the window, watching the last of the January light drain out of the sky over the western pasture. The house felt different now that I knew what was in the walls. I had been careful since Walt's warning, keeping conversations inside to weather and cattle and the mundane logistics of ranch life. But knowing and feeling were different things, and what I felt standing in my own kitchen was the particular violation of understanding that the silence around you had never actually been silent. My phone rang. Diane again. I answered on the second ring. Walt came back inside as I was lifting the phone, read my expression, and stopped where he was. "Dad," Diane said. Her voice was different from this morning, quieter, more compressed, the voice of someone choosing words with unusual care. "Hey, sweetheart. Did Grant stop by today?" She asked it the way you asked a question you already knew the answer to and needed confirmed. "No," I said. "Just Howard Slade doing some paperwork follow-up." "Why?" A short silence. "No reason. I was trying to reach him earlier and he wasn't picking up." "I haven't seen him," I said. Another silence. Longer this time. I waited the way I had learned to wait, without filling the space, without making it easier for the other person to stop short of what they were trying to say. "Dad," she said finally. Her voice had dropped another register. "Be careful." 2 words. Then the line went quiet, not disconnected, just quiet, the particular stillness of a call that had reached the edge of what the caller was willing to say out loud. "I will," I said. "You too, Diane. I have to go." Something in the background, a door footsteps. Then, "Love you." The call ended. I lowered the phone and looked at Walt. "Grant just walked in," Walt said. It was not a question. "That's my read." I set the phone on the counter. She called to warn me and ran out of time to say anything useful. Or ran out of safety. Walt sat down at the table. He's monitoring her communications. She knew she had a narrow window and she used it. I looked at the shelf by the doorway, the same shelf where Grant's phone had been sitting 36 hours ago, where this had all started. Above it, a row of family photographs. Diane at her college graduation, laughing at something off camera. Diane and Grant at their wedding, standing in the garden on a September afternoon 12 years ago. She had been radiant that day, completely unreservedly happy in the way that people were happy before they understood what they had agreed to. "I'm going to meet her in person tomorrow," I said. "Somewhere Grant can't monitor." "Agreed." Walt looked at me. "And Bob, when you talk to her, be ready for the possibility that she knows more than either of us expects." I looked at the wedding photograph for a long moment. "I know," I said. "That's what worries me. I chose the location, a small coffee shop on the northwest side of San Antonio. The kind of place with mismatched furniture and enough ambient noise to make conversation private without effort. I had been there once before, the years ago, with Eleanor. It was not a place Grant would associate with me. I arrived 20 minutes early and took the corner table with my back to the wall. Old habit. Diane came in at 9:15, still in her hospital badge, which meant she had come directly from an early shift. She looked thinner than I remembered from Christmas. The kind of thin that came not from diet, but from months of carrying something heavy and not sleeping well because of it. She sat down across from me and looked at my face for a moment before she spoke. "You know something," she said. "I know several things," I said. "But I want to hear from you first. How are you, Diane? Really?" She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Outside, a city bus went past the window, and she watched it until it was gone. "I've been trying to leave him for 8 months," she said. "I have a lawyer in Austin. Everything is drafted. I haven't filed because every time I get close, something happens. Grant mentions something he knows about me, or about you, or about Tyler's school situation. Nothing direct, just information dropped into conversation. So I understand that he's paying attention. He has tracking software on your phone, I said. She closed her eyes briefly. I thought so. I didn't know how to check. Walt checked. It was installed 14 months ago. I kept my voice even. Diane, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly, even if you think the answer will upset me. She looked at me. Okay. How long have you suspected that Grant was dangerous, not difficult, not controlling? Dangerous. She didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her coffee, then back up at me. And in that moment, she looked very much like Eleanor, the same quality of stillness before a difficult truth. 2 years, she said. Maybe a little more. I nodded. Why didn't you come to me? Because Grant told me that if I said anything to you, he would report certain irregularities in your defense contractor filings from 15 years ago to the Inspector General's office. She said it quickly, the way you said something you had been holding in your chest for a long time. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if there's anything there, but I couldn't risk it. I sat with that for a moment. Then I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Listen to me carefully, I said. I need you to trust me for the next 3 weeks. Can you do that? She looked at my hand on hers, then at my face as something shifted in her expression. The particular release of a person who has been standing alone in a dark room and has just seen light under a door. Yes, she said. I slid a folded piece of paper across the table under my palm. Put that in your coat pocket without looking at it. Not here. She did. Go to work, Chom, I said. Act normally. I'll be in touch through Howard Slade's office. Use their landline, not your cell. She stood, then stopped. Dad, what did you find? Enough, I said. More than enough. Tyler arrived at 2 o'clock, dropped off by a neighbor's car, Diane's arrangement. A handwritten note passed through the window. He doesn't know anything. Just needs to see you. D. Tyler Mercer was 14, 5 feet 9, and still growing with his mother's eyes and neither parent's tendency toward deception. He was an honest kid. Straightforward in the way teenagers were before the world taught them that honesty had costs. He climbed the fence beside me the way he had since he was 8, and we looked out at the pasture without filling the silence immediately. That was something I had always valued about Tyler. How's school? I asked. Finals next week. He picked at a splinter on the fence post. Mom keeps reminding me like I don't know. She was the same way. Studied 3 weeks ahead for everything. He smiled. Then after a moment, I miss Grandma a lot lately. More than at first. Is that normal? Grief doesn't follow a schedule, I said. It shows up when it wants to. He nodded slowly. Then, almost as an aside, the way teenagers mentioned things without understanding their full weight. Dad visited her a lot at the hospital. More than Mom sometimes, which was kind of strange since Mom's the doctor. I kept my eyes on the pasture. Is that right? Yeah. I went with him once fall of last year, I think. I saw him take something out of Grandma's bag and put something else in. I asked what he was doing. Tyler frowned at the memory. He said he was swapping out her expired medication. Taking the old stuff, leaving the new. Was your mother there? I asked. Tyler shook his head. No. She had been called downstairs to speak with a nurse. Dad said he was helping so Mom would not have to worry about one more thing. I did not move. I did not change my breathing or shift my weight on the fence or do anything that would register to a 14-year-old boy as significant. That sounds like him, I said. Always trying to help. That's what I thought. Tyler shrugged. I didn't think about it again until just now, actually. Weird the things you remember. Funny how memory works, I agreed. We talked for another 40 minutes about school, about the horses, about whether Tyler wanted to learn to drive on the ranch roads next summer. Normal things. I gave him cookies Eleanor had taught me to make, and he ate 4 of them without noticing he was doing it, which was exactly what she would have wanted. When his ride came at 4:30, he hugged me at the gate. "Come back soon," I said. "I will." He climbed into the car, then leaned out the window. "Hey, Grandpa, I think Grandma knew how much you loved her, in case you ever wonder." I watched the car until it disappeared past the cattle guard. Then I stood alone, in the cold January air, holding those words, and understood that a 14-year-old boy had just given me something far more important than he knew. I went inside and called Walt. He arrived the next morning at 7 with a canvas bag I had never seen before, the kind of bag that did not invite questions about its contents. He set it on the kitchen table without explanation, unzipped it, and began laying out equipment in a methodical row. Handheld scanner, frequency detector. A second device I didn't recognize but recognized the category of immediately. "RF sweep first," he said. "Then physical inspection of baseboards and outlets. It'll take 2 hours." "I'll make coffee," I said. I stayed out of his way. Walt moved through the house the way he moved through everything, without wasted motion, without commentary, without the performance of competence that less capable people felt the need to put on. I watched him from doorways when I could, and listened to the silence when I couldn't. He found the first device behind the baseboard in the kitchen at 7:45. He carried it to the table and set it down without a word. I looked at it, small, flat mat, black, the size of a matchbook. Military specification hardware, the kind that didn't come from a consumer electronics store. By 10 o'clock, 7 of them were lined up on the kitchen table. Kitchen, living room, my office, the master bedroom, the barn equipment room where the router was housed. Both vehicles. I stood at the table and looked at all 7 of them for a long time. 6 months, Walt said, reading the hardware stamps. Installed approximately last July. July. Eleanor had still been alive in July. Week spending most of her time in the bedroom or on the porch in the afternoons, but alive. These devices had been recording her voice too. Every conversation she had managed to have inside this house in the last 6 months of her life. I thought about the nights since she had passed. The evenings I had sat in my office and talked to her photograph because there was no one else and the silence was too large. The mornings I had stood at the kitchen window and said her name out loud just to hear it in the air. The one night in March when I had cried for 3 hours and said things I would not have said if I had believed anyone was listening. All of it recorded. All of it filed somewhere on a server Grant or Prath controlled. "We leave them in place," Walt said. "All 7. Touch nothing." "I know." My voice came out level. I was grateful for that. "From this point forward inside this house, we are 2 old men with nothing on our minds except the weather and the cattle." Walt looked at me. "Everything else happens outside." I nodded. "Then you said last night you had something else to tell me. Something about Grant's history before Diane." Walt was quiet for a moment. He looked at the 7 devices on the table, then at me. "Let's go outside," he said. The January air outside was sharp enough to make your eyes water. We stood on the porch, facing the pasture, our backs to the house and its 7 sets of ears, and Walt told me about Sandra Hayes. He spoke without preamble, the way he always delivered information he knew would land hard. "Before Diane Grant was married once. Houston. Her name was Sandra Hayes, she went by Sandy. 38 years old when they married a financial analyst at an energy firm. No children. Significant personal assets, approximately $3 million in savings investments, and a life insurance policy her father had taken out for her when she graduated college." I said nothing. I watched a hawk turn slow circles above the far pasture. "They were married 22 months, Walt continued. "Sandra died on a Tuesday morning in November of 2009. Her car left Interstate 45 at a curve south of Houston. The guardrail failed to stop it. She went into a concrete drainage channel 20 feet below the road. Ruled an accident," I said. "Single vehicle accident, no witnesses, poor visibility due to early morning fog. Medical examiner found no evidence of foul play. Case was closed in 6 weeks." Walt paused. Grant collected the full life insurance payout 11 days after the funeral. He was living in San Antonio within 4 months. I turned that over in my mind. The timeline. The efficiency of it. How did you find this? I asked. FBI had a file. Preliminary inquiry never elevated to a full investigation because there wasn't enough to move on. Sandra's brother filed a complaint 18 months after her death, said Grant had been asking about her insurance coverage within the first month of their marriage. The brother was told there was insufficient evidence to pursue. Walt looked at me. The file was never closed, just dormant, until now. Until I made a call yesterday morning. Walt turned slightly enough to look at me directly. Bob, Grant Mercer has done this before. Your family was not an opportunity he stumbled into. It was a target he selected, approached, and has been executing against for 12 years. 12 years. Grant at the defense contractor function in 2011 shaking Prath's hand. Grant meeting Diane. Grant sitting at our dinner table for the first time, passing the breadbasket, asking Eleanor about the history of the ranch with what I had taken for genuine interest. He had been working from the moment he walked through our door. Diane, I said. She's in danger, Walt said. Not immediate. Grant still needs her signature on certain documents. But once the transfer is complete, she becomes a liability. Yes, I looked out at the 800 acres Eleanor had loved. The hawk was gone. The sky was the flat gray of a January that had decided not to offer anything. Walt, I said, tell me there's more. He looked at me steadily. There is, but I need you to sit down before I say it. There was no chair on the porch. I sat on the railing anyway. Walt did not sit. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at the middle distance the way a man looked when he was about to say something he had been dreading. Eleanor's oncologist, he said. Dr. Marcus Webb. Do you remember him? Of course. Webb had been Eleanor's primary oncologist for 3 years. Careful man, methodical, the kind of doctor who explained things twice to make sure you understood. What about him? He applied for an emergency medical license transfer to Oregon 6 months before Eleanor died. Left his practice in San Antonio with 2 weeks' notice after 18 years. Walt paused. I spoke with him yesterday. It took some convincing, but he talked. I waited. Eleanor's treatment protocol changed significantly in October of 2024, Walt said. Webb told me he began receiving pressure, he wouldn't say from whom directly, but the implication was clear, to adjust her immunosuppressant dosage. The stated reason was managing a secondary inflammation issue. Webb had reservations but was given documentation that appeared legitimate. He stopped. The documentation was fabricated. Webb figured that out 3 weeks after Eleanor died. By then, he had already transferred his license and left the state. The porch railing was cold under my hands. Someone fabricated medical documentation, I said, to get her doctor to increase a drug that would suppress her immune system, at a dosage that, combined with her existing condition, would accelerate organ failure. Walt's voice was completely flat. Eleanor's cancer was aggressive, Bob. She was not going to recover. But Webb's original prognosis gave her 12 to 18 additional months with proper management. He looked at me. She died in 3. I stood up. I did not speak for a long moment. I looked out at the pasture, at the oak trees along the fence line, at the particular sky of a January morning in Texas that had no interest in what was happening beneath it. Grant had not waited for Eleanor's cancer to take her. He had helped it. The documentation, I said. Who had access to that level of medical knowledge? Who could fabricate something convincing enough to fool an oncologist? Someone with medical training or access to someone who did. Walt looked at me carefully. Or someone who had been in a position to observe Eleanor's treatment closely enough to understand the pharmacology involved. Grant. Who had visited the hospital more than Diane. Who had sat in those consultation rooms with his hand on Eleanor's shoulder and his eyes on everything the doctors said. Tyler, I said. Yes. What he saw in the hospital room, the medication swap, If it was an immunosuppressant substitution, it fits exactly. Walt held up one hand. But we don't have the evidence yet. We have a frightened doctor in Oregon and a 14-year-old's memory of something he didn't understand. We need more before this becomes a case. How much more? If the hospital retained tissue or blood samples, the FBI can request expedited testing, Walt said. We may have preliminary results in 72 hours. Not enough for trial yet, but enough to move. I turned and looked at him. Then we move in 72 hours. We went back inside at 11 and spoke about the weather until Walt confirmed the kitchen was clear of anyone monitoring in real time. Then he opened his laptop and connected to his secure hotspot. I need to show you something, he said. I've been sitting on this since this morning because I wanted to be certain before I said it out loud. He turned the laptop to face me. A series of wire transfer confirmations. Account numbers I didn't recognize, routing codes, timestamps. I had spent 15 years running a defense contracting firm, and I knew what I was looking at, money moving through a structure specifically designed to make it difficult to follow. $4 million, Walt said. Transferred out of the Callaway Family Trust into Mercer Holdings, LLC, a Delaware shell company, Grant Incorporated in 2022 over 3 separate transactions in October and November of last year. I looked at the dates. October, when Eleanor was already declining rapidly, when Diane had been spending every available hour at the hospital and had not been sleeping or eating properly for weeks. Diane signed a financial power of attorney, I said. It was not a question. August of last year. Grant presented it to her during a particularly difficult week. Eleanor had just been moved to palliative care. The document gave Grant authority to act on Diane's behalf in certain financial matters related to the family trust. Walt pointed at the screen. Diane signed it. She has told me she does not remember signing it. He waited until she was exhausted enough not to read it. That's my assessment. Walt pulled up a second document. The remaining $18 million is still in the trust. But there's a scheduled transfer date. He pointed. February 17th. I looked at the date, then at the calendar on the wall. 37 days. The same date as the passport, I said. Gregory Walsh's passport becomes fully operational on February 17th. Same day the transfer is scheduled to complete. Walt closed the laptop. He has a flight booked under that name. I won't tell you how I know that. The destination is a jurisdiction where extradition would be slow, expensive, and politically difficult. I sat back in my chair. Grant had built this the way you built a military operation, with redundancy, with timing, with exit routes planned before the first move was made. The financial transfer and the exit were synchronized to the hour. If everything went according to his schedule by the morning of February 18th, there would be no Grant Mercer. Only Gregory Walsh, somewhere unreachable, $22 million ahead. 37 days, I said. 36 by tomorrow morning. Walt looked at me. We need to move fast and we need to move carefully. One mistake and he accelerates the timeline. Where do we start? Walt didn't hesitate. Patricia Holt. She's the weakest point in his chain. If she breaks, we get the documentation we need to freeze the trust before February 17th. I looked at the calendar one more time. Set up the meeting, I said. Patricia's assistant had gone home for the evening. The 14th floor was quiet. When I stepped out of the elevator, just the hum of the building's climate system and the distant sound of traffic on East Commerce Street below. Patricia opened the door herself. She looked at me, then at the folder under my arm, and stepped aside without a word. We sat across from each other at her conference table. I opened the folder and placed 3 documents in front of her. The wire transfer confirmations for the $4 million, the incorporation papers for Mercer Holdings, LLC, and a photograph of the financial power of attorney bearing Diane's signature. Patricia looked at all 3 without touching them. I know what these are, she said. Then you know why I'm here. She was quiet for a moment. A long moment. Outside, the city moved through its evening without any interest in what was happening on the 14th floor of this building. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want to know what Grant is holding over you," I said. "Not because I intend to use it against you, because I need to understand the shape of what he's built." Patricia looked at her hands on the table. Then she looked at me directly, the way she hadn't quite managed during my first visit. "10 years ago," she said, "I was handling the estate of a client named Hargrove. Elderly man, significant assets, 2 adult children, who had not spoken in 15 years. He had drafted a will that divided everything equally." She paused. "The son came to me privately. He offered me a substantial sum to alter certain language in the filing language that would effectively redirect the majority of the estate to him without triggering a legal challenge from his sister." Another pause. "I did it. The sister received significantly less than her father intended. I have lived with that for 10 years, and Grant found out. Grant knew the son. I don't know how. He came to me 4 years ago with a copy of the original will and the altered filing side by side." She straightened slightly. "He didn't ask for money. He asked for access to your family's legal documents. He said he just wanted to be kept informed. That was all." "And you believe that?" I told myself I had no choice. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. "I want you to understand. I never altered anything in your family's documents. I gave him information. I answered questions I should not have answered. I looked away from things I should have questioned." She met my eyes. "That is still a betrayal. I know that." I looked at her for a long moment. She was not a villain. She was a woman who had made one serious mistake a decade ago and had been paying for it ever since in the currency Grant preferred: complicity, silence, and the slow erosion of her own integrity. "There is a way out of this," I said. "But I need something from you." She straightened. "What?" I looked at her steadily. "I need you to host a family meeting." For the first time since I had walked in, something shifted in Patricia Holt's expression. Not quite relief, but something adjacent to it. "Tell me what you need," she said. Patricia's building was behind me by 8 o'clock. I drove back to the ranch with the heater running and the radio off, turning the pieces over in my mind, the way I had once turned over operational maps, looking for the seams, the places where the plan was thinner than it appeared. Walt was on the porch when I pulled in, waiting, which meant he had something to say that couldn't be said inside. I got out of the truck and walked up to him. Neither of us spoke until I had climbed the steps, and we were standing side by side looking out at the dark pasture. "Patricia's in," I said. "Good." He nodded once. "I need to tell you something about the FBI." I waited. "They have a file on Grant Mercer," Walt said. "Not because of your family. They've had it for 18 months. He paused. "Prath has been selling defense procurement information to a foreign broker. Contract specifications, vendor relationships, security clearance, data from firms he still has access to through his retirement network. Grant has been acting as the intermediary, collecting the information from Prath, packaging it, passing it along in exchange for a percentage." I looked at him. "How long have you known this? That Prath was dirty 6 months. That Grant was the broker 3 months. He held my gaze. "I didn't come to you sooner because I didn't have enough to be certain. And because—" He stopped. "Because you needed to see what I would do when I found out on my own," I said. Walt was quiet for a moment. "The FBI needs a controlled environment to take both of them simultaneously. If either one is alerted, the foreign broker disappears and the case collapses." He turned slightly to face me. "They've been building toward an arrest for 8 months. What they've been missing is a reason to bring Grant into a room he can't walk out of." "A family meeting," I said. "A legally convened estate proceeding hosted by the family's attorney of record, with all relevant parties present." Walt nodded. "Grant can't refuse without raising suspicion. And once he's in that room, He won't know Prath's already been compromised, I said. That's his blind spot. He assumes Prath is still protected. That is exactly his blind spot. Walt looked at me carefully. Bob, I have to be honest with you about something. The FBI's primary interest here is the espionage case. Your family's situation, Eleanor, the money, Diane, those are serious charges, and they will be pursued. But they are not why the Bureau has been building this for 18 months. I absorbed that. You came to help me, I said, and you came to close a case. Both of those things are true, Walt said. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I looked out at the dark pasture for a long moment. I can work with that, I said. But first I need Tyler. One more conversation more specific than the last. I turned toward the door. I need the boy to remember exactly what he saw. Diane arranged it through Howard Slade's office landline, clean and untraceable. I arrived at the school cafeteria at 11:15 and waited with a cup of coffee I had no intention of drinking. Tyler came in at 11:30, backpack over one shoulder, mildly puzzled the way teenagers were when adults appeared in their school day without explanation. Grandpa? He sat down across from me. Mom said you wanted lunch. I was in the area, I said. Thought I'd take you up on that standing invitation. He smiled. I don't think I ever made a standing invitation. You implied it. I pushed a menu toward him. Order whatever you want. We talked for 15 minutes about ordinary things, a history project, a friend who made varsity basketball, whether the horses would be available in spring. I let the conversation breathe. I did not steer it. Then casually, you mentioned something yesterday about visiting Grandma in the hospital with your dad. Tyler looked up. Yeah, I've been thinking about that. Trying to piece together those last few months. I kept my voice gentle, unhurried. Do you remember when that was, the visit where you saw him swap the medication? Tyler set down his fork and thought carefully. October, he said. Right after fall break. Dad took me that Wednesday after school. October of 2024. Yeah. She was in room 312, oncology floor. What exactly did you see? I asked. Take your time. Dad had a small white box in his jacket pocket. Prescription box, like from a pharmacy. He went to Grandma's bag on the IV stand, unzipped the side pocket, took out a box that was already in there, put it in his own pocket, then put the white box in. Did he say anything? I asked what he was doing. Tyler's brow furrowed. He said taking out her expired medication, buddy. Making sure she has the fresh stuff. Just like it was completely normal. He paused. Is it normal for someone who's not a doctor to do that? I looked at my grandson across the table. No, I said quietly. It isn't. Tyler went very still. Something moved behind his eyes, a slow, reluctant understanding taking shape that I wished with everything I had he never needed to have. Grandpa, he said. What did Dad do? I reached across and put my hand on his arm. I'm going to take care of it, I said. That's all you need to know. I'm going to take care of it. I was back at the ranch by 2 o'clock. Walt had set up his secure laptop on the porch table, a wool blanket over his knees against the January cold, the encrypted video connection already running when I sat down across from him. The FBI agent on screen was a woman named Carlson, mid-40s, close-cropped hair, the particular economy of expression that came from years of saying exactly what was necessary and nothing beyond it. She had been running the Prath investigation for 14 months. She looked at me the way people looked at someone they had been reading a file about and were now meeting for the first time. Mr. Calloway, she said, Walt has told me what you've put together. It's considerable work for a civilian. I had good material to work with, I said. My wife left me an excellent foundation. Carlson nodded once, acknowledging that without dwelling on it. Here's where we are. We have sufficient evidence on Prath to arrest him today. We are not going to do that. If Prath disappears from Grant's network without explanation, Grant accelerates his timeline and we lose him. She folded her hands. We need Grant in a controlled environment where we can take both of them simultaneously and prevent either from signaling the foreign broker. A family estate meeting, I said, hosted by the attorney of record with legitimate legal standing. She nodded. Grant cannot refuse without raising suspicion. He will believe he is walking into a routine proceeding that he controls. He will not check on Prath's status beforehand because he has no reason to think Prath is compromised. She paused. That is his vulnerability. His only one, Walt said. It's enough. Carlson looked at me. We'll have 2 agents in the room as Patricia Holt's legal assistants. Standard procedure for complex estate matters, Grant won't question it. The moment we have sufficient verbal confirmation of the financial fraud on record, we move. What about Eleanor? I asked. The medical evidence. The tissue analysis will be complete within 60 hours. If it confirms immunosuppressant interference, we add homicide charges at the time of arrest. Carlson's voice did not change. We are treating that as a parallel track. I looked at Walt. He gave me a small nod. Diane needs to be in the room, I said. She deserves to be there. Agreed. We'll notify her through a channel Grant can't monitor. Handwritten, delivered in person. Carlson looked at her notes. We're proposing January 16th. That gives us 3 days to finalize the tissue analysis and position our people. January 16th, I said. Can you be ready? I thought about the 7 devices in my walls. The hop cedar in Eleanor's closet. The 8-digit number she had written in her careful left-leaning hand. The file audio ending with her voice saying my name. I've been ready since January 9th, I said. After the call ended, Walt went inside. I stayed on the porch alone for a few minutes. Then I went to the kitchen, stood at the counter, and looked at the 2 mugs sitting where I had left them that morning. I picked up Eleanor's mug, held it in both hands. Eleanor, I said quietly, I'm going to finish what you started. I did not sleep well on the 14th. Not because I was afraid. Fear had been crowded out somewhere around day 3 by the particular cold clarity that comes when a man understands exactly what he is fighting for. I did not sleep because my mind kept running the operational sequence the way it had run sequences for 28 years. Entry points, contingencies, the places where a plan could fracture. At 6 a.m., I gave up and made coffee. 1 cup. I stood at the window and watched the sun come up over the east ridge where Eleanor was buried, where the live oaks grew dense and the light hit the grass at an angle that made it look for about 15 minutes every morning like something worth protecting. My phone rang at 7:12. Walt. The results came back, he said. I set my coffee down. Tell me. Immunosuppressant compound, elevated concentration, found in preserved pancreatic tissue from the November biopsy the hospital had on file. His voice was level and precise, the voice he used when he was controlling something. The concentration is inconsistent with Eleanor's prescribed dosage. Consistent with a secondary administration, something introduced outside her official treatment protocol. October, I said. Tyler saw him in October. The tissue damage pattern suggests the compound was introduced over 6 to 8 weeks beginning late September or early October of 2024. Walt paused. Dr. Webb's original prognosis was 12 to 18 additional months. The compound accelerated her organ failure significantly. Without the external interference, Eleanor would most likely have been alive today. The kitchen was very quiet. I had known this was coming. I had built toward this conclusion for 6 days. I had known what the result would be before Walt called. Knowing and hearing were still different things. Is it enough? I asked. Combined with Tyler's testimony and Dr. Webb's statement, yes. Agent Carlson has authorized homicide charges. Walt's voice softened slightly. Bob, I'm sorry. It helps, I said. Don't stop saying it. A brief silence. I'm sorry, he said again. I picked up my coffee and looked at the East Ridge. Grant Mercer had sat at my dinner table, shaken my hand at holidays, stood beside my daughter at their wedding, and smiled for the photographs. And in October of 2024, he had walked into a hospital room with a small white box in his jacket pocket, and taken from Eleanor the months she had left. "Tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow," Walt confirmed. 7 a.m. I watched the light move across the East Ridge until the 15 minutes of gold were gone. Then I went to get dressed. Diane's hospital ended its afternoon shift at 3. I was in the parking structure by 245 third level, the corner furthest from the elevator, no cameras, no foot traffic, the kind of place that existed in every large building and that most people never thought about. She came through the stairwell door at 3:10, still in her white coat, and stopped when she saw my face. "How bad?" she said. "Sit down first." "Dad." Her voice was firm. "How bad?" I told her. All of it in order without softening any of it. The 6 years of messages. The router Grant had installed to intercept our communications. The financial power of attorney she had signed when she was too exhausted to read it. Sandra Hayes in Houston. Dr. Webb in Oregon. The tissue results that had come back that morning. Diane stood very still through all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not cry. She listened the way she listened to difficult diagnoses at work, with her full attention processing each piece before moving to the next. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "He killed her," she said. "Yes." She turned away, walked 3 steps toward the concrete wall, and stopped her back to me, one hand pressed flat against the surface. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I knew it, and I stayed quiet, because I was afraid of what he had on you. And while I was staying quiet, he was—" Her voice broke on the last word. "Just once." Then she pulled it back. "She died 3 months faster than she should have, because of him. And because I said nothing." "Diane," I crossed to her, "you said nothing because he threatened your father. That is not the same as doing nothing." She turned around. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. Eleanor's jaw, Eleanor's particular brand of grief that refused to collapse into itself. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Tomorrow morning. Patricia Holt's office, 10 a.m. You sit across the table from Grant, and you let me run it." I held her gaze. "Can you do that? Can I sit across a table from the man who killed my mother and not say anything until you give me a sign?" She almost laughed, a short, broken sound. "I spent 12 years sitting across the table from Grant Mercer, Dad. I know how to keep my face still." I put my hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow it ends," I said. She nodded once. Then she straightened, smoothed her white coat, and looked at me with something in her expression I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror that morning. "Readiness. Go home," she said. "Get some sleep." "You too." She pushed through the stairwell door without looking back. I stood alone in the parking structure and listened to her footsteps fade and thought that Eleanor would have been very proud of the woman her daughter had become. I was back at the ranch by 5. Walt had gone home to prepare his own things for the morning. The house was quiet, in the particular way it was quiet on winter evenings, the land settling around it, the temperature dropping the live oaks outside, contracting slightly in the cold, the way old things did. I went to the bedroom, not for any specific reason, not to look for anything. I simply went there the way a man went to the place that held the most of the person he had lost, when he needed to be close to that person one more time before something large and irreversible happened. I sat on my side of the bed, looked at her photograph on the nightstand, the one from our anniversary trip to the hill country in 2018, Eleanor standing on a limestone ridge with the wind in her hair, laughing at something I had said that I could no longer remember. I had spent 6 days being angry, correctly, justifiably, with full cause. But sitting in this room on this night, I found the anger had quieted into something else, something that had more room in it. I thought about the question I had been avoiding. Could I forgive Eleanor? Not for the relationship with Grant, I understood now, what that had been, how it had begun, what Grant had done to manufacture it and exploit it. Eleanor had not been a willing architect of her own betrayal. She had been a woman who felt invisible, who had been found by a predator, skilled at finding exactly that kind of woman, and who had recognized the trap only after she was already in it. What I needed to decide was whether I could forgive her for the silence, for carrying 18 months of fear and evidence and dying knowledge without once reaching for me across the 12 feet of darkness between our sides of this bed. I sat with that for a long time. Then I thought about why she hadn't reached for me. Not because she didn't trust me, because she trusted me completely, trusted that I would act, trusted that I would move immediately, trusted that my first instinct would be to protect rather than to gather evidence and build a case solid enough to hold. She had known me for 47 years. She had known exactly what I would do. So she had done it herself, quietly, at considerable cost to herself, in the only way she could do it without costing me everything in the process. That was not a betrayal. That was Eleanor. I lay back on the bed without undressing and looked at the ceiling. The house made its small sounds around me. Outside, the January wind moved through the oaks. I closed my eyes, and in that space between waking and sleep, I heard her voice, not from the audio file, not the weakened, careful voice of a woman in her last months, but the voice I had known for 47 years, warm and slightly amused, the way it always was, when she thought I was being obtuse about something obvious. You were always the smartest man in the room, Bob. I slept. Before I show you what happened when Grant walked into that room, comment trap right now, because in 60 seconds, 70 years of patience is about to become the most dangerous thing in that building. A reminder, this story includes fictional elements crafted for educational purposes. Names and details are coincidental, but what happens next is something worth watching. Grant arrived at 10:07 unhurried, and certain the walk of a man who had already decided how the morning would go. He looked at Howard Slade first, a flicker behind his eyes, very small, very fast. Then the smile came up and covered it. Bob. He took the chair at the end of the table. Howard didn't expect to see you here. Continuity of representation, Howard said pleasantly. Given the complexity of Eleanor's estate, of course. Grant settled into his chair and looked at me. I'm glad we're finally doing this. A lot to sort through. I agree, I said. Patricia opened with procedural language. Grant listened with the patience of a man enduring a formality before getting to the part that mattered. He believed he was the most dangerous person in the room. He had not checked on Prath this morning. That was his mistake. His only one. But it was enough. Before we addressed the estate documents, I said I'd like to table some items for the record. I opened my folder and placed the first document on the table. 6 years of messages, I said. Your phone. Beginning March of 2020. Grant looked at the printed screenshots. The smile stayed on his face for exactly 2 seconds. Then it was gone. I don't know what you think. Second item. I placed the wire transfer confirmations beside the screenshots. $4 million into Mercer Holdings, LLC, October and November of last year, drawn from a trust my daughter signed under duress while her mother was dying. Diane did not look at her husband. She looked at the table in front of her and did not move. I need to speak with an attorney, Grant said. Patricia looked at him steadily. I no longer represent you, as of this morning. He looked at Patricia, then at the 2 associates along the wall who had stopped moving. Third item. I set down the next page. Sandra Hayes, Houston, Interstate 45, November of 2009. $3 million in life insurance collected 11 days after her funeral. Grant pushed his chair back slightly, not standing, just creating distance, the instinct of a cornered animal that had not yet decided which direction to move. And fourth, I placed the FBI tissue analysis on the table. Eleanor Calloway, October 2024. Immunosuppressant compound externally administered. 12 to 18 months of additional life removed. The 2 associates stood up. Grant Mercer. The nearer one opened his credentials. You are under arrest for murder in the first-degree financial fraud and conspiracy to commit espionage against the United States. Grant looked at me. You have no idea what you've... Sit down, I said quietly. He stopped talking. They put the handcuffs on. Grant looked at me one final time across the table. A long, searching look, the look of a man trying to understand where the ground had shifted beneath him. I looked back at him and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Patricia and Howard stepped out without being asked. The door closed behind them. Diane was still in her chair. She had not moved since the agents walked Grant out, had not turned to watch him go, had not said anything, had simply remained exactly where she was, with her hands flat on the table and her eyes on the middle distance. I stayed in my seat and waited. The room was very quiet. Outside in the hallway, I could hear the muffled sounds of the building going about its day, an elevator, a phone ringing somewhere, the ordinary machinery of a world that did not know what had just happened in this room. Diane said, "Did he kill her?" "Yes." She closed her eyes. One breath, two. Then she stood up and walked to the window and stood there with her back to me, looking out at the San Antonio skyline. And I watched her shoulders rise and fall with the effort of holding herself together. She held it for perhaps 30 seconds. Then she stopped holding it. I went to her. I put my hand on her back, and she turned around and pressed her face against my shoulder, the way she had not done since she was a small child, and she cried. Not the restrained, controlled grief of the parking structure yesterday, but the real thing, the kind that came from somewhere below the chest, from the place where a kept the things they had been too frightened to feel for too long. I held her and said nothing. Sometimes there was nothing to say, and the attempt to say something was just a way of making yourself feel less helpless. I had learned that from Eleanor. After a while, Diane pulled back and looked at me. Her face was red, and her eyes were swollen, and she looked more like herself than she had in years. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "I knew it for 2 years, and I stayed quiet." "You stayed quiet to protect me," I said. "And while I was protecting you, he was..." She stopped. Started again. "Mom died 3 months early, Dad, because I said nothing." "Diane." I took both her hands. "Your mother spent 18 months collecting evidence alone so that I would not act too soon and lose the case. She made the same choice you made, silence as protection. You are more like her than you know." Diane looked at me. Something shifted in her expression. "She knew," she said. "At the end, she knew what he was. She knew everything," I said. "And she built us the case that put him in handcuffs this morning." Diane was quiet for a long moment. Then very softly, she always was the smartest one. "Don't tell her I agreed with that." Diane almost smiled. The first real, almost smile I had seen from her in longer than I could remember. The door opened. Howard Slade stood in the frame holding a small black USB drive. "Bob," he said quietly, "I have something Eleanor asked me to give you when you were ready." Howard said he would wait inside. I told Diane to take as long as she needed and went downstairs. Walt was in the parking lot, leaning against his car with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at the middle distance the way he looked when he was deciding how to begin something. I stopped in front of him. "Say it," I said. He was quiet for a moment. The January sun was out for the first time in days, thin and cold, the kind of light that illuminated without warming anything. 15 years ago, Walt said I was running an operation in Eastern Europe. A source I was managing passed information to a third party he shouldn't have had contact with. The information was low-level nothing that cost lives, nothing that compromised active assets. But it happened on my watch, and I approved a communication protocol that made it possible. He looked at me. I buried the after-action report. Not to protect myself, to protect the source who would have been executed if the full account had gone into the record. I made a judgment call, and I have stood behind it. "But Grant found out," I said. "Grant found out." Walt nodded. "I don't know how he had access to people and channels I underestimated. He came to me 2 years ago, didn't ask for money, didn't ask for information. He simply made clear that he knew and that he expected me to stay out of anything involving his family arrangements. Walt paused. He thought that would be enough to neutralize me. He miscalculated. He miscalculated badly. Something moved in Walt's expression, not quite humor, but something in that neighborhood. He assumed I would choose self-preservation over friendship. He did not account for the fact that after 30 years, those two things are not always separable. I looked at him for a long moment. "You came to help me," I said. "And you came because you needed Grant arrested before he could use what he had on you." "Both of those things are true," Walt said. "I'm not going to dress it up as something cleaner than it was." I thought about that. About 30 years of chess games and phone calls, and the particular trust that built up between men who had seen each other in difficult circumstances and not looked away. About the fact that Walt had shown up within 2 hours of my call, had brought his equipment and his contacts, and his 30 years of operational knowledge, and had sat on my porch in January cold to keep me company while I processed things no man should have to process alone. People were complicated, even the good ones, especially the good ones. I held out my hand. Walt looked at it. Then he shook it. "Thank you," I said, "for all of it. Don't thank me yet." He released my hand. "Go hear what Eleanor has to say." I turned back toward the building. Behind me, Walt got into his car. I did not look back. I went upstairs where Howard Slade was waiting in a small conference room, with a black USB drive on the table in front of him, and the door was closed and the room was quiet. Howard left without being asked, just set the USB on the table, looked at me once and closed the door. I sat alone with the laptop and the drive. I held it in my palm for a long moment. Eleanor had built a condition into this. I had to find my way to Howard on my own without being told. She had known me well enough to know I needed to have already understood enough before I was ready to hear the rest. That was Eleanor. Even at the end, making sure the timing was right. I plugged the drive in, one file, no label. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room. The illness had taken the upper registers, that lightness she had when she was amused. But the cadence was hers. The precision was hers. I knew it within 3 words. "Bob, if you're hearing this, you found your way. I knew you would." A pause. "The distance you felt these last 2 years, the evenings I was somewhere else, even when I was sitting right next to you, that wasn't about you. It was never about you. I was carrying something I couldn't put down. I know what that looked like from where you were standing. I'm sorry." I put my hand over my mouth. Grant found me at a moment when I felt invisible. Not as an excuse, as an explanation. He was skilled at finding that moment in people. It had nothing to do with you failing me. You never failed me. Not once in 47 years. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle, making everything sharp and very clear. I spent 18 months trying to build something that would protect you and Diane and Tyler. I hope it was enough. I hope the worst of it is behind you. A longer pause. "The mornings, Bob. Go back to the mornings. Sitting across from you with bad coffee and the radio too loud, that is where I was happiest. That is what I want you to go back to." A breath. "You were always the smartest man in the room. I just needed you to remember that." Then very quietly, "I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't say it one more time in person." The file ended. The screen went dark. I did not move to wake it. Then I did something I had not done since the morning Eleanor died. Not the controlled 60 seconds I had permitted myself. The real thing from somewhere below the chest, from the place where I had kept everything I had not allowed myself to feel for 8 days, and 1 year and 3 weeks and 4 days. I cried. After a while I stopped. I closed the laptop, walked downstairs, and drove home. My phone rang at 4:15 somewhere on US 281 north of San Antonio. "Walt, Prath is in custody," he said. I kept both hands on the wheel. Outside, the hill country rolled past in the late afternoon light, cedar and limestone and the particular pale gold of January grass. I had driven this road 1,000 times. It looked the same as it always had. Where? I asked. His house. San Antonio, the Alamo Heights property. Walt's voice was even. He didn't resist. FBI went in at 3:30 with the warrant. He was sitting in his living room. His lawyer was there within 20 minutes, which tells you he had been expecting this conversation at some point. What did they find? Enough. Hard drives, encrypted communications, physical documents he should have destroyed months ago. Prath was meticulous about many things, but he got comfortable. People always get comfortable eventually. A pause. The foreign broker has been identified. Interpol has been notified. That part of it is out of our hands now. I drove in silence for a moment. 20 years. I had known Dennis Prath for 20 years. I had sponsored his promotions, put my name on his file, stood in rooms and spoken well of him to people whose opinions shaped careers. I had invited him to this ranch, fed him at my table, trusted him with the kind of easy, unreserved confidence that came from believing you understood a man completely. I had been wrong about him the way you were wrong about people you stopped examining because you had already decided what they were. I keep thinking about when I was wrong about him, I said. Where exactly it happened, what I missed. You didn't miss anything, Walt said. Prath hid it deliberately and professionally for years. You trusted him because he gave you reasons to trust him. That's not a failure of judgment. That's what betrayal requires. It requires trust first. That's a generous reading. It's an accurate one. Walt paused. Bob, you can spend the next year looking for the moment you should have seen it coming. Or you can accept that some people are very good at being one thing while being something else entirely, and that is their failure, not yours. I thought about that. The ranch came into view as I crested the last hill. Before the turnoff, the main house, the barn, the oak trees along the east fence line, dark against the late sky. Home. The same as it had always been. Walt, I said. Yeah, thank you for the accurate reading. A short silence. Drive safe, he said, and ended the call. I turned off the main road onto the gravel drive. The tires crunched over the frost-hardened surface, familiar sound, 40 years of the same sound. I came around the bend, past the water tank, and the house came into full view. On the front steps, Diane was sitting with Tyler beside her. Tyler had his knees pulled up and was talking, gesturing at something in the distance. Diane was listening with her head slightly tilted, a posture I recognized from Eleanor. I pulled up and sat in the truck for a moment, just looking at them. Then I got out. Tyler saw me first. He stood up from the steps and raised one hand, the particular wave of a teenage boy who wanted to appear casual about being glad to see someone. I raised my hand back and walked toward them. Diane stayed seated. She looked different from this morning, not lighter exactly, but less compressed, the way a person looked after holding their breath for a long time and finally being given permission to exhale. We thought we'd come out, she said. Tyler wanted to see the horses. The horses are always available. I sat down on the step below them, the way I used to sit when Diane was small, and we watched the evening come in over the west pasture. Tyler sat back down beside his mother. Quiet for a moment, unusual for him working up to something the way teenagers did, with great internal effort and minimal external indication. "Grandpa," he said finally, "is Dad coming back?" Diane looked at me. I looked at Tyler. He deserved a straight answer delivered in a way he could carry without being crushed by it. "No," I said, "he's not." Tyler nodded slowly, looked out at the pasture. A long moment passed. "Did Grandma know about what Dad was?" "She figured it out," I said. "Toward the end, she was very brave about it." He was quiet again. Then she was always brave. She used to tell me that being scared and being brave were the same thing. You just had to choose which one was in charge. A pause. I didn't get it when she said it. I think I get it now. I looked at this 14-year-old boy, his mother's eyes, Eleanor's words coming out of his mouth, and felt something shift in my chest that had been locked in place for a long time. "She would be very proud of you," I said. She'd tell me to do my homework, Tyler said, but he was almost smiling. Diane put her arm around him, and he let her, which at 14 was its own form of courage. We sat on the steps as the sun went down, behind the west ridge, not talking much. Tyler eventually went to check on the horses. Diane and I sat in the dark and listened to the land settle. He's going to be all right, Diane said. It'll take time, but he's resilient. He gets that from his grandmother, I said. Diane looked at me sideways. He gets it from his grandfather, too. Are you okay? She asked. I thought about the honest answer. About Eleanor's voice in that small room. About the East Ridge where the morning light made everything worth protecting. Not yet, I said, but I will be. Diane leaned her head briefly against my shoulder. Then Tyler came back from the barn, smelling of horses and cold air, and the evening continued. The days that followed moved differently from the days before. Before time had been a countdown each morning, one day closer to a deadline. Each conversation, a tactical move in a sequence that had to land in exactly the right order. After the 16th time opened back up into something that resembled ordinary life, with the particular rawness that came after sustained intensity. Patricia Holt filed a full cooperation agreement with the FBI the morning after Grant's arrest. She provided every document, answered every question, waived her attorney-client privilege without negotiation. The evidence of Grant's coercion, the altered Hargrove will. The documentation he had used to leverage her silence went into the record. The Texas Bar Association opened a review. It would not be easy for her, but she had chosen it. The $4 million in Mercer Holdings LLC was frozen within 48 hours by court order. Howard filed an emergency motion to invalidate the financial power of attorney Diane had signed grounds of undue influence and material misrepresentation. Granted in 12 days. The $18 million in the Callaway Family Trust was secured. In Houston, the Sandra Hayes case was reopened. Grant's financial records were subpoenaed. Sandra's younger sister, Carol, who had filed the original complaint 18 years ago and been told there was insufficient evidence, received a call from the FBI's Houston field office. I was told she cried for 20 minutes and then asked what she could do to help. Dr. Marcus Webb flew back to San Antonio voluntarily and gave a full statement. He had not slept well in 14 months. He said so in the deposition without being asked. Diane's divorce moved through the Austin court system with unusual speed. 61 days after the arrest, she was no longer married to Grant Mercer. She called me that evening. It's done, she said. How do you feel? I asked. She thought about it honestly. Like I've been underwater for 12 years and someone finally pulled me up. A pause. Is that strange? No, I said. That's exactly right. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while. The legal machinery would continue for months. Grant would fight every charge with whatever resources he had left. It would be loud and exhausting. But the essential thing was already done. The money was safe. Diane was free. Eleanor's name was in the case file attached to the truth of what had happened to her. Outside, March had arrived without announcement. Through the kitchen window, I could see the first bluebonnets coming up along the fence line, small and blue and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened since January. Spring, the first one I had actually noticed in 2 years. I went out early that morning, not for any practical reason. The horses had been fed, the north fencing could wait. I went out because the bluebonnets were coming up along the fence line, and the air smelled like cedar and recent rain, like the land deciding to try again, and I wanted to be in it. I walked the east boundary, the same route I had walked with Eleanor 100 times along the creek bed, up through the cedar, draw out onto the limestone ridge where you could see the full spread of the property in one direction and the hill country rolling away in the other. Eleanor had loved this ridge. She had made me stop here more times than I could count, not to say anything in particular, just to stand in it. I stood in it for a minute. The grass was greening at the roots, that tender green that existed for about 3 weeks in March before the Texas sun Sun Fexen turned everything to straw. The oaks along the east fence were putting out new leaves, small and pale. Down by the creek, something moved in the brush. A deer, probably. The land going about its business. I thought about the things Eleanor and I had planned for this place. A kitchen garden with raised beds and a stone path. A pond in the low meadow. A riding ring for Tyler, who had been asking about horses since he was 6. Grant had taken 2 years from us. 2 years of mornings and ordinary plans that never got made, used up by grief and isolation, and the slow, invisible damage he had been doing from the inside. He could not take the years that were left. Standing on that ridge, I understood that what I was feeling was not happiness. Happiness was too simple, and probably too much to ask for yet. What I was feeling was intention. The decision to do the things still doable, to make the plans still makeable, to treat the time remaining as something worth using rather than enduring. Eleanor would not have wanted me to endure it. She would have wanted me to use it. I turned and walked back. The garden would go on the south side where the light was best. The pond would take earthwork, but Tyler could help in summer. The riding ring could start small, a basic oval, good footing, enough room to learn. I came around the barn, and Tyler was standing in the yard in his socks. "Grandpa," he said, "you're teaching me to ride today, right? Mom said maybe today." I looked at him. Then at the barn. "Go put some boots on," I said. Tyler had stayed the night. I could hear him upstairs, the particular silence that meant a teenager was asleep, different from the silence of an empty house in a way I had not expected to notice, but did. I stood at the counter and reached for a mug. One mug. I stood there for a moment, aware of what I was doing and what I was not doing. For 14 months, I had reached for 2 mugs every morning without deciding to the body, continuing habits the mind had not yet finished grieving. This morning my hand had stopped at 1, not because I had forgotten Eleanor. I would not forget Eleanor if I lived another 30 years. I reached for 1 mug because somewhere in the past weeks, without marking the exact moment, I had learned to hold her differently. Not as an absence that needed to be filled, as a presence that did not require props. I poured the coffee, sat down in my chair. Outside, the March morning was coming in gold and cool, the blue bonnets along the fence line catching the early light. I thought about Eleanor's voice in that small room on the 14th floor. Go back to the mornings. That is where I was happiest. I lifted the mug and drank. From upstairs, footsteps. Tyler awake earlier than I expected, moving toward the stairs with the heavy-footed enthusiasm of a boy who had remembered something good was happening today. "Grandpa!" His voice came down before he did. "Is there coffee?" "No," I said. He appeared at the bottom of the stairs in yesterday's clothes hair, entirely unsettled. "Why not?" "You're 14. He dropped onto the bottom step. "Grandma used to let me have half a cup." I looked at him over my mug. She absolutely did not. She might have. "Tyler, I'm just saying there's a chance." "There is no chance." I stood up. "Sit down, I'll make you tea." He made a face but sat at the table without further argument, which was progress. I put the kettle on and leaned against the counter, looking at him. This boy, with his mother's eyes, and his grandmother's stubbornness, sitting in the same chair Eleanor had sat in 10,000 mornings, arguing about coffee he didn't actually want. "Hey, Grandpa." "Yeah." "Do you think Grandma would have liked watching me ride?" I thought about Eleanor on the fence rail, coffee in hand, calling out unhelpful commentary, while Tyler attempted something difficult. I thought about how she would have pretended to be calm, while being privately terrified he would fall, and how she would have been the loudest person there when he didn't. "She would have loved it," I said. "She would have been impossible about it." Tyler smiled, a real one, the kind that reached his eyes. "Good," he said. "I'm going to be really good at it." "I know," I said. The kettle began to whistle. The morning continued. Summer came to the hill country the way it always did, without apology, all at once, the temperature climbing 20 degrees in a week, and the grass going from green to gold practically overnight. Diane drove out on a Saturday morning in late June with a cooler of food she insisted on bringing and a lightness about her that I had not seen in years. She looked like herself again. Not the self she had been performing for 12 years, the composed, careful self that never let anything show but the actual self, underneath which was warmer and funnier and more like Eleanor than she probably knew. She sat on the top rail of the fence with her coffee while Tyler and I worked in the riding ring. "Keep your heels down," I told Tyler. "They are down. They're pointing at the sky. That's down from where they were." Diane laughed from the fence. Tyler shot her a look that was pure 14-year-old dignity, which made her laugh harder. The horse, a quarter-horse mare named Ruth, who had the patience of someone who had made a deliberate choice to be patient, stood with magnificent stillness while Tyler rearranged himself in the saddle for the 4th time. "Okay," Tyler said. "Okay, I'm ready." "You said that twice already," I said. "I'm more ready now." I walked Ruth forward slowly, one hand on the lead rope, and Tyler lasted approximately 6 steps before grabbing the saddle horn with both hands and making a sound that was not quite a word. "Don't grab the horn," I said. "I'm not grabbing it. I'm resting my hand on it." "Tyler, it's a resting grip. There's no such thing as a resting grip," Diane called from the fence. "That's exactly what Grandma used to say when she held the door handle in the car." Tyler pointed at his mother. "See, it runs in the family." I looked at Diane. She raised her coffee cup in a small salute, entirely unrepentant. We went around the ring 3 times. By the 3rd circuit, Tyler had released the saddle horn. His heels were approximately where they were supposed to be, and he was sitting with the tentative uprightness of someone who had just discovered that balance was possible if you stopped fighting it. "There," I said. "Feel that?" "Yeah." His voice was different, quieter, more concentrated. "Yeah, I feel it." We stopped at the far end of the ring. Tyler sat on Ruth and looked out over the fence at the pasture beyond the same view I had looked at every morning for 40 years, the limestone ridge and the cedar, and the particular blue of a Texas summer sky. "Hey, Grandpa," he said. "Yeah, do you think Grandma would have liked watching me do this?" I thought about Eleanor on this fence rail. Her coffee, her commentary, the way she would have been quietly terrified and loudly proud. "She would have been impossible about it," I said, "in the best possible way." Tyler smiled and looked back out at the pasture. "Good," he said. "I'm going to get really good at this." "I know," I said. "Walk her around again." He did. The federal courthouse on Alamo Plaza was the kind of building that had been designed to make you feel the weight of what happened inside it. High ceilings, marble floors, the particular acoustics that turned every footstep into a statement. I had been in rooms like this before for different reasons, in a different life. They had the same effect regardless of which side of the proceeding you were on. Diane sat to my left. She had dressed carefully, not formally, but carefully the way you dressed when you wanted to be present without making the day about yourself. She had not brought Tyler. We had discussed it and agreed this was not a memory he needed to carry. The courtroom filled slowly. Sandra Hayes' sister sat 3 rows behind us, a woman in her 50s named Carol, whom I had spoken to briefly on the phone in February. She had driven up from Houston the night before. We nodded at each other across the rows without speaking. There was nothing to say that the day would not say better. Grant was brought in at 9:05. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was the same size, the same broad shoulders, the same face I had looked at across dinner tables for 12 years. But something in the way he occupied space had changed. The particular confidence that had always surrounded him like a second skin was gone, and without it, he looked like what he was, a man in his early 40s, in a government-issue suit, waiting to be told what the rest of his life would cost him. His attorney had negotiated a plea agreement. Grant had fought every charge for 8 months with considerable skill and considerable money, and in the end had accepted what was offered, because what was offered was better than what a jury would give him after hearing Tyler's testimony, Dr. Webb's deposition, and the full account of Sandra Hayes. The judge read the terms. Murder in the first degree, Eleanor Calloway, life without parole. Murder in the first degree. Sandra Hayes' life without parole consecutive. Financial fraud, 20 years. Conspiracy to commit espionage against the United States, 20 years consecutive. The math was not complicated. Grant Mercer would die in a federal prison. When the judge finished, Grant turned in his seat and looked at me. I had been waiting for this. I had thought about what I would feel when it happened, whether there would be satisfaction, or anger, or grief, or some combination of things I didn't have a name for. I had thought about Eleanor and Sandra Hayes, and the 14 months Dr. Webb had spent not sleeping well in Oregon, and the 12 years Diane had spent performing contentment for an audience of one. I felt none of those things. What I felt was simpler and quieter than any of them. I felt the truth being recorded, put into the permanent record where it would stay. I held Grant's gaze for a moment. Then I looked away because there was nothing there worth looking at anymore. Diane took my hand. Outside in the September heat, she asked, "How do you feel?" I looked up at the Texas sky. That particular deep blue that September made the color of something finished. "Free," I said. "I feel free." I waited until January, not because I had to, because it felt right to do it on the anniversary, 2 years to the day, the same pale winter light coming through the same windows, the same January quiet that the hill country made when the wind dropped and the land held its breath. I went to the bedroom and opened the closet. I had been ready for this for a while. Not ready in the sense of having stopped grieving. I had come to understand that the grieving would not stop, would simply change shape over time, become less like a wound and more like a scar that you stopped noticing, except when the weather changed. Ready in the sense of being able to do the thing without being destroyed by it. I worked through the closet slowly. Her clothes, I kept the things that had been hers in a way that went beyond fabric and thread, the blue cardigan she had worn every winter for 20 years, the dress from our anniversary trip to Santa Fe in 2012. The rest I folded carefully into boxes for the church sale she would have approved of. Shoes, hats, the collection of scarves she bought and never wore because she always said she would learn to tie them properly, and never did. At the bottom of the closet behind a pair of winter boots was a shoebox I did not recognize. I sat down on the edge of the bed and opened it. Inside paper. Dozens of small pieces, some torn from notepads, some cut from the margins of larger pages, some written on the backs of envelopes. All of them covered in Eleanor's left-leaning handwriting. I picked up the first one. The morning of our silver anniversary, B pretended he forgot. Had been planning for 2 weeks. I knew immediately, but pretended to be surprised. Best breakfast of my life. I picked up another. July 14th, 1998. B fixed the porch railing I'd been asking about for 3 months. Did it while I was at the grocery store. Did not mention it. Just sat down to dinner like nothing had happened. Another. The night of the big storm, winter of 2009, power out candles, B made soup on the camp stove and we played cards until 2 in the morning. Tyler will never know his grandmother spent half of that night laughing so hard, she cried. I read them all. There were 43 of them. Not a word about Grant. Not a word about the last 2 years, the fear, the evidence she had been building in secret. Just this 43 moments she had wanted to keep written down in the quiet of some ordinary afternoon and tucked away at the bottom of a closet. The last one was undated. I love him because he never changed the things that mattered. When everything else shifted, he still made 2 cups of coffee every morning. That is not a small thing. That was never a small thing. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then I folded the papers carefully back into the box, put the lid on, and set it on the nightstand on her side, where it belonged. I woke before 5, not from a nightmare, not from the particular weight of grief that had pulled me out of sleep so many mornings in the past 2 years. I woke the way I had woken for most of my adult life, cleanly, without transition, the way a man woke when he had made his peace with the day ahead of him. Tyler was still asleep upstairs. I could hear the silence of it. I went to the kitchen. The January morning was doing what January mornings did, dark still, the land outside the window, a suggestion rather than a fact, the temperature somewhere below 40 and falling. I stood at the counter and looked at the coffee maker for a moment before reaching for the mugs. I reached for two, not from habit this time, not the automatic, unconsidered reach of a man whose hands had not yet caught up with his circumstances. I reached for two mugs, deliberately knowing exactly what I was doing and why I was doing it. Because this was how I remembered her, not as an absence, as a presence that belonged in this kitchen, at this counter, on this particular January morning, and every morning after it. The second cup was not a monument to grief. It was a conversation I intended to keep having on my own terms for as long as I had mornings left. I poured both cups, sat down in my chair, looked at her chair across the table. 2 years, I said. The kitchen held the word the way it held everything quietly, without judgment. The way a room held all the conversations that had ever happened in it. I wrapped my hands around my cup and drank. Outside, the sky was beginning to separate from the land, that first gray suggestion of light along the eastern ridge, the ridge where the oaks grew dense and the ground held its cold through the morning. I watched it for a while. I had watched this sky change color more mornings than I could count, and I had not once grown tired of it, which seemed to me one of the more reliable forms of grace available to a person. My phone buzzed on the table. I turned it over. A text message sent at 5:12 a.m. Bob, long time. There's a matter involving the Prath case I'd like to discuss when you have a moment. No urgency. W.B. Walter Briggs, of course. I looked at the message for a moment. Then I turned the phone face down on the table and picked up my coffee. The sky outside was going from gray to the first pale gold. Upstairs, I heard Tyler shift in his sleep, that particular creak of the guest bed that meant he was close to waking. I had been 70 years old for 3 months. I had buried my wife, exposed her killer, protected my family, and learned slowly, imperfectly, at considerable personal cost, that the things worth protecting were not the things I had spent most of my life thinking about. They were this: the gold coming up over the East Ridge, the boy upstairs, the second cup of coffee cooling slowly in Eleanor's chair. Walter Briggs would keep. I drank my coffee and watched the morning come in, and for the first time in 2 years, I was not waiting for anything. I am 70 years old. And if there is one thing these past 2 years have taught me, it is this: the people who want to take everything from you will always look for the moment you stop paying attention. I stopped paying attention. For 12 years, I sat at the same table as a man who was dismantling my family from the inside, and I saw nothing. Not because I was foolish, but because I had already decided I knew everything worth knowing about the people around me. Don't make that mistake. Not with your finances, not with the people who manage them on your behalf, not with the ones who smile at every family dinner and ask just a few too many questions about things that are not their business. Trust is not something you give once and walk away from. It is something you tend the way you tend land, with regular attention, with honest eyes, with the willingness to see what is actually there, rather than what you want to be there. Eleanor saw it before I did. She paid for that clarity alone in silence at a cost I will carry for the rest of my life. I believe God placed that USB drive in her hands and the wisdom in her heart, not to punish either of us, but to make sure the truth would survive long enough to matter. My personal opinion: the most dangerous person in any room is not the one who raises their voice. It is the one who never does. If this story made you think about your own family, your own blind spots, your own table, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, the stories here are worth staying for. To everyone who stayed until the end, thank you, truly. The stories ahead contain certain fictional elements constructed for the purpose of reflection and education. If that is not what you are looking for today, there is no shame in stepping away and finding something that speaks to where you are. But if you stay, I promise to make it worth your time.